Alright, wake up, you two. Hope you had a nice nap letting the autopilot do its thing for the past few hours, because now it's time for you to do your job. You're only running about 3 hours behind schedule, which is pretty much par for the course for domestic carriers, so nobody on this bird's going to be any more upset with us than they usually are, as long as you can get it on the ground in one piece. Welcome to Sky Team. Place the control panel between you. Ideally, you're seated on the same side of the table, so everything appears upright for both of you. Put the airplane axis disc in its place, with the arrow pointing at the black triangle in the middle. Put the switch tokens on top of all the green lights. Put the blue and orange aerodynamics markers on the matching colored spaces of the speed gauge, and the red brake marker on its starting space on the brake track. The player on the left is the pilot and takes all 4 blue dice. The player on the right is the co-pilot and takes the orange dice. Slide the altitude track into position on the top right of the control panel using the side with the green bar at the top with the number 6000 in the display window. Place a reroll token on each of the marked spaces. Slide the approach track for Montreal Trudeau Airport into position on the top left with the cloud icon in its display window. Place airplane tokens on the spaces of the approach track according to the icons on the left side. Keep the coffee tokens in a supply nearby and give each player their corresponding player screen. Leave any components we haven't mentioned in the box for now. At the start of the round, if there's a reroll token in the current altitude space, like there is on the first round, remove it and add it to your supply. At any time during any round, either one of you can spend the reroll token for both of you to reroll any number of dice. Next, discuss your strategy without talking about the dice. No, if you get a 6, put it here, or use a reroll if you don't have any 4s. Just talk about objectives. We gotta clear that plane out of the way, or we're running out of time to open those flaps. When you're ready, both players roll all their dice behind their player screens so that your partner can't see them. As soon as you've rolled, nobody's allowed to speak for the rest of the round. Starting with the player the arrow in the current altitude space indicates, which is the pilot in round 1, take turns placing one of your dice in any of the available spaces matching your dice color. The concentration spaces at the bottom of the board can take dice of either color. If the space you choose has a number, the number you rolled on that die has to match it. Otherwise, you'll have to place the die somewhere else. Depending on the value of the die you place, and on what space, you'll trigger a different action. There are 2 mandatory actions both players must take each round: the axis and the engines. You can place a die of any value on these spaces, but if any of them doesn't have a die at the end of the round, the game immediately ends in defeat. When the second die for the axis is placed, subtract the lower value from the higher value and turn the airplane axis that many notches toward the player who placed the bigger number. If the arrow ever reaches the X on either side of this track, you lose. At the end of the last round, you'll need to make sure the axis is completely horizontal, like it is at the start, in order to win. When the second die for the engines is placed, add the values of both of them together. If the sum is a number that falls between the blue and orange markers on the speed gauge, advance the approach track 1 space. If the sum is greater than the orange marker, advance the track 2 spaces. If the airport at the end of the track is in the display window when you're supposed to advance, you overshoot your destination and lose the game. If there are any airplane tokens on the space in the current position window when you're supposed to advance the track, you crash your plane into them and everyone dies. So, don't do that. To clear those planes out of the way, place a die on a radio space. Count a number of spaces up the approach track equal to the value of the die you place, starting at the one in the current position, and remove 1 airplane. If there aren't any airplanes in that space, you either must not have needed that die for anything else, or you screwed up, because you just wasted it. Nice job. When the pilot places a die in one of the landing gear spaces on the left side of the board, slide the switch so that you can see the green light underneath it, and advance the blue aerodynamics marker 1 space. You'll need to make sure all these switches are turned on by the end of the last round in order to win. If you play a die to a space where the switch is already turned on, nothing happens. The spaces for the flaps on the co-pilot side of the board work pretty much the same way as the landing gear, but they have to be deployed in order from top to bottom, so you can't place a die in one of these spaces until all the switches above it are already green. When you flip one of these switches, advance the orange aerodynamics marker and make sure you flip them all by the end of the game. There are 3 more pilot-only spaces near the bottom of the board. These are the brakes. Just like the flaps, these have to be deployed in order, this time from left to right. Every time you flip one of these switches, advance the red brake marker 1 space. Unlike the flaps and the landing gear, you don't have to deploy them all to win the game, but the more you deploy, the easier winning will be. Anytime somebody places a die in a concentration space, immediately add a coffee token to one of the coffee spaces on the bottom left corner of the board. Anytime either one of you plays a die, you can spend a coffee token to increase or decrease the value by 1, as long as you're ending with a number between 1 and 6. You can spend multiple coffee tokens on the same die, but there's no wraparound to subtract your way from 1 to 6 or vice versa. You can only hold on to 3 of these at a time, so playing a die here when you've got them all doesn't do anything. And don't forget your reroll tokens if you still have things you need to get done and no useful dice to place. Once everyone's placed all their dice, advance the altitude track 1 space, bringing you 1,000 feet closer to the ground. Reclaim your dice from the board, discuss your strategy for the next round, and roll and repeat. If your altitude track reaches the ground before you get to the destination, you crash and kill everyone on board. If the airport's in the display window when you get to the ground, you're moving into the last round of the game. This is your last chance to make sure your axis is lined up, the path is clear of other air traffic, and your flaps and landing gear are deployed. Also, in this round, the way you read your engine speed changes. This time, when you add the dice you place on them together, you'll compare that number to the strength of your brakes, as indicated by the red marker. If your speed, as determined by the sum of your engine dice, is greater than the strength of your brakes, you run the plane right off the runway and lose the game. But if your brakes are greater than your speed, there are no airplane tokens left on the approach track, your flaps and landing gear are all deployed, and your axis is completely horizontal, you execute a perfect landing and win the game. Congratulations! You now know how to land a commercial airliner. Once you feel like you've mastered this process, crack open the flight log booklet to try something a little different. There are 20 more scenarios to choose from, and they only get trickier from here. Longer routes, shorter routes, special abilities, variable air traffic, clouds and mountains to avoid, a fuel supply to manage, interns to train, a tailwind to deal with, a timer, fuel leaks, ice breaks, and any combination of all these modules. But you gotta land your first flight before you can tackle the tougher stuff, so get to it. May the winds be ever in your favor. Hey, if you like learning board games from this channel, and I don't want to guilt anybody or anything, but also if you'd like us to keep on teaching them, it'd help us out a lot if you'd leave us with your thumbs up and a subscription. If you have any questions about this one, let us know down in the comments. We usually answer pretty quick. And if you want to check out some of our other stuff, we've got reviews, playthroughs, top 10s, and more fun coming your way. So make sure your notifications are on as well. Don't miss our live show, The Board and Barrel, every Sunday night at 5 p.m. Pacific, where we play games like this one. And you can change the course of the game with our Buff and Nerf house rules, as well as play a game of virtual bingo while you're watching for a chance to win a free board game of your choice. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you on the next one.